Last week, I talked about Jaleel McLaughlin. 2 weeks ago, it was Michael Wilson I was telling you to stash. Both those guys have been top waiver wire ads this past week. So which players should you be stashing before the competition ahead of week 5? All right, my first pick is going to be a player that isn't going to be an obscure name, not somebody that isn't rostered anywhere, but it's a guy who's just vastly underowned in fantasy, only in a third of fantasy leagues. It's time to buy in on Rashee Rice. I generally have said I'm not really buying into Chiefs receivers or Chiefs running backs because they get overhyped, where everybody wants a receiver on Kansas City to just boom, be the next Tyreek Hill or whatever, because they're tied to Pat Mahomes. And yet we see over and over again, it doesn't happen. And it's definitely not happened this year because, if anything, they're kind of struggling without a legit wide receiver one. Now, I'm not saying Rice is that he's going to be an alpha or anything like that, but I am saying this is the time to pick him up if he's out there. And let me tell you why. First of all, the playing time is increasing, the snap share, but also when he is on the field, he's getting targeted at an extremely high rate. Right now, he is third in targets per route run at 34%, only behind Devontae Adams, and he's tied with Tyreek Hill. He obviously hasn't run as many routes as those guys, so you might think it's a little skewed with a smaller sample size, but it's still encouraging, and especially the fact that he's on that offense, and every target he's getting from Pat Mahomes is a pretty high quality target. Even more surprisingly, talk about quality targets, how about this? He has 6 red zone targets already. That means he's tied for 8th among all receivers. He scored that touchdown early in week 1. Everyone got excited. It hasn't happened since, but it seems like it's coming soon. Look at the Chiefs' schedule over the next month. This weekend, they get the Vikings. We know about that secondary. Then they get the Broncos, officially the worst defense in the NFL right now. And then the Chargers and their defense. And then the Broncos again. It almost cannot possibly get better for a passing offense. And when it looked like we were ready to buy into Sky Moore, well, he's kind of giving way to Rashee Rice slowly but surely. They're used in slightly different ways, but still, it seems like Moore isn't really breaking through. Rice keeps showing encouraging signs. I think he gets more targets and so much more opportunity in the coming weeks. So right now, I'm going all in on him. I will add him in a 12-team league. Any league where I have roster space, I need upside, especially the bye weeks are now here. You might need some high upside flex plays. It's Rice. All right, now let's get a little bit deeper. Talk about another rookie receiver who's on a very explosive offense, Ronnie Bell in San Francisco. We know the deal with the 49ers, so many talented players there at every position, and that's kind of a problem for fantasy at least because all those mouths cannot be fed at the same time. That's why George Kittle hasn't really done much. Debo has his ups and his downs. Ayuk has been going off, but I guarantee there'll be a game coming here soon where he doesn't. It can't be every guy every week. So where does Bell even fit in? Well, he fits in because, like a couple weeks ago, guys get hurt and they miss time. Ayuk had missed a game. We know Debo almost missed a week ago, hadn't practiced. Debo, of course, that injury history. Ayuk has had his share of missed games here and there. So we're looking ahead. This is, I don't want to say a handcuff, right, for a receiver, but this is a guy who has a lot of upside. We saw what happened that game Ayuk missed. What happened? Bell stepped in and caught a touchdown. This is definitely a player that's gone under the radar. He was a 7th round pick out of Michigan in college, despite playing for some good teams. Never went for 1,000 yards in this season. His measurables, solid, but don't jump off the page or anything like that. This is a guy, though, is obviously earned the trust of Kyle Shanahan. That means something. And if you can just step in and substitute for a guy like Ayuk or Debo, if necessary, nothing else needs to be said. There's your fantasy upside right there. And possibly for the first time ever, we'll go back-to-back Ronnies. This one, I got to give a shout out to Chris, my co-host. He's been talking about Ronnie Rivers for a little while now, and let's figure out why. Now, not long ago, I mentioned Zach Evans. He's a rookie running back for the Rams. I really liked in the pre-draft process, was hoping he would get to a good landing spot, and the Rams actually did seem like a good spot, and then when Cam Akers got traded, it seemed even better. But he hasn't cracked the lineup, and Rivers is now the RB2 for that team behind Kyren Williams. Look, despite all the Kyren for MVP talk, I'm not buying into it, first of all, but second of all, we know this is a guy who's really not built to be a workhorse. Sean McVay doesn't care. He insists on running every running back that he has into the ground. it might actually happen with Kyren. But we did hear that supposedly either McVay thinks or Les Snead told him to think that he shouldn't do this, that maybe Kyren should get a breather once in a while. And so what we saw in week 4 was Ronnie Rivers actually got some touches. In fact, he had 11 opportunities, went for 9 carries, 47 yards on the ground. Now, he wasn't in there on third downs. That's Kyren's role still. So not catching passes and, of course, not being used inside the red zone or the money zone. That probably won't change as of right now. So Rivers look at him as a between the 20s kind of runner. But obviously, there's potential for him to increase his role. And the real idea here behind stashing Rivers is if you have Kyren and he does just fall apart one game, then you got the new starting running back for the Rams who will get 20 plus touches a game because that's just how McVay rolls. Now, I won't lie, in a dynasty league, I prefer Evans. I just think he's a little bit more talented. But right now, Rivers is the guy who's getting run. And in a redraft league, he's a guy that you should be stashing if you're looking for an upside running back. Now, if you play in a fantasy football league that requires a tight end in your starting lineup, which is like 95% of all fantasy leagues, then you know that it's been pretty rough. We said this all draft season. Go early, meaning Kelsey or Andrews, or just wait. Wait meaning just punt and stream and don't grab a guy in the mid to late rounds that is going to just wind up being a waste of a draft pick. Well, guess what? Pretty much everybody outside the top 3 tight ends has looked like a waste of a draft pick. George Kittle so far, Dallas Goedert, Kyle Pitts, and that sort of includes Pat Freiermuth because he hadn't really done much. The Steelers' offense has been terrible, and now Muth is out a couple of weeks with a hamstring injury. Now, as much as I don't want to try to convince you to buy into the Steelers' offense in any way right now because it looks like the offensive coordinator there is staying, I will say that if you are looking for somebody who at least has some scoring potential, I think we're going to have to look at Darnell Washington. If you follow college football at all, you probably know Washington played for the Georgia Bulldogs, kind of second fiddle to Brock Bowers in that offense at tight end, but look, a third-round pick, a guy who is big, meaning 6'7", 264, and he runs a 4.6 40, which gives him a speed score in the 98th percentile. If we're just looking at pure athleticism at this position, according to Player Profiler, which does an excellent job with all of these rankings in these, they have him number 9 all time as far as athleticism at the tight end position. Okay, that's great and all, but doesn't it matter what team he plays for and who the quarterback is and whether they actually score points? Of course it does. Pat Freiermuth, despite being in this exact same situation for the past year and 4 weeks, has been a solid tight end, and they're going to need somebody to step up because Deontay Johnson's still out. Of course, Freiermuth is out. There's not a lot of weapons here. George Pickens is getting blanketed by opposing corners. Washington is that big, safe, easy target across the middle of the field that they might finally decide is a smart thing to do and throw to him. Don't know why Matt Canada insists on forcing Kenny Pickett to keep throwing outside the numbers and down the field instead of taking some more smart, short passes. Again, can't promise it's going to change, but it would make sense. And Washington, if nothing else, is a massive red zone target. Got some touchdown potential. I'm not saying to stream him and start him right away. Let's see what happens here. Remember Donald Parham, who scored a couple touchdowns just by standing in the end zone and doing this? That could be Darnell Washington. And then it's really hard to find a quarterback that's just out there that nobody knows about that you think has some potential. But here we go. Now, I'm really talking super flex, 2 QB type of leagues. There really aren't quarterback stashes in single QB leagues that are worth adding. I do think that Taylor Heineke in Atlanta could be a name to look for. We all know the situation. Desmond Ridder is not cutting it. It's possible he hits the bench just like his predecessor Marcus Mariota did last year. Now, Ridder hasn't been Mariota level bad. He's not really turning the ball over that much. He's just not scoring. In 8 NFL games so far between the end of last year and start of this year, Ridder has a total of 5 passing touchdowns in 8 games. They were able to get away with this and actually win a couple games early because the rushing offense was so good and they didn't really play too tough an opponent, but they're getting exposed a little bit. Teams are figuring it out. Hey, if we just stop Bijan from breaking off a big run, we can hold this team in check. Atlanta does not have the kind of defense to go back and forth and win games consistently like this, and when the losses start to pile up, it could be time to make a switch. Nobody's going to be interested in Heineke because, well, he's a backup and he's a guy who had a chance and lost his job from Washington last year, right? That's why he's on the bench right now. But let's admit, he wasn't that bad last year. This is a guy who threw for 3,400 yards, had 20 touchdowns, 15 interceptions. The turnovers are kind of what did it. Too many risks, not a guy you consistently want to put out there to win games because ball security had been an issue. But that's also why he might be the perfect fit for this offense, because he doesn't have to throw the ball a ton. He can hand it off to Bijan and Algier, and he has a perfect target in the tight end like Kyle Pitts. And Heineke does have the arm talent to get it down the field to guys like Drake London and Kyle Pitts. If this happens and Heineke becomes a starter, you've got to be at least a little interested, because if you think about it, Atlanta has at running back, receiver, and tight end one of the most talented players in the league at each of those positions. It's really kind of sad how it's been wasted so far. Again, once Atlanta starts to go on a little losing streak, if that happens, it wouldn't be surprising if Ridder hits the bench. Look, this is not a guy who was a number one pick. They don't have a lot invested in him. There's no contract here that they feel like they have to satisfy. This team could easily pivot somewhere else, draft a quarterback next year, do something. Why would they have to hang on to Ridder if he's just not getting it done? So I won't go so far as to say that Heineke is a guy you want to roll out there in a single QB league the rest of the season if he does become the starter. Look, in your super flex leagues or in your leagues where everybody has two quarterbacks and you have nothing and you're desperate or somebody gets hurt, whatever the case is, a bye week fill-in, Heineke could get it done for you. Those are the players I'm thinking about stashing in my fantasy leagues, and you might want to consider too before they become hot commodities. Don't forget, we got start, sit, trade ideas, our waiver wire, everything you need to win in week 5 is right here. Check out our playlist before you set your winning lineups.